Welcome to Dangerous African Confession HD, the place where secrets too dark to be told come to light. This is a confession video about our sister and her encounter with an African prophet who made them stop schooling and devote their lives to the pastor and the church. This is about her journey into the world of dark fake prophet and dark rituals, which has led her to the terrifying truth: there is no one to know God for you. And that it takes only you to know God, and not through anyone else. Hit the subscribe button if you are new here, hit the notification bell, and leave your thoughts in the comments.
My brother, the truth is that it wasn't as simple as walking away. The confrontation I had with the prophet had been necessary, but I quickly realized how much the life I had built around the prophet was fragile, how many pieces of myself had been shattered in the process. You see, when I walked out of that room, the weight that had once bound me, an invisible chain, forged by years of manipulation and control, was finally gone. But that freedom didn't come without consequences. You see, the prophet's followers, the ones I had called my family, shunned me. Some accused me of being deceived by the enemy, others whispered about my betrayal. The church house, once my home, became a place of isolation and bitterness. They had all been trained to see me as a threat to their faith, a danger to the work of God. They didn't know the truth. They only knew the version of me they had been taught to believe. And it was fine by me. Just that, I pity them for still being in the dark without knowing who really they are still serving, believing he is a true servant of the Most High. But in that loneliness, something strange happened. That I realized that I had given so much of myself away, sacrificed everything for a cause that wasn't my own, but in that brokenness, I found pieces of myself that had been buried deep beneath the weight of the prophet's lies. And I wasn't going to let those pieces be lost forever. But you see, the healing wasn't easy. The shame, the guilt, the questions, they lingered. I had given up everything to follow a lie, and now I had to live with the consequences of those years. I questioned my own judgment, my own discernment. Let me move deep into the whole thing for you to understand my pain and guilt. My brother, I've lived my entire life under the shadow of a man I once called a prophet. The man I simply called Papa, even at my age. There was no way he would be able to give birth to me, but I still called him Papa. Sometimes, I wonder how I ended up here, where all I have is a lifetime of choices made out of blind faith. But when I look back, it all starts with a simple moment, a decision made when I was just a child, unaware of the chains that would slowly wrap themselves around my soul. You see, I grew up in a small village where everyone's life seemed intertwined with faith. There was this pastor who used to come and organize crusades around our area. And it is this same man that I later went to serve in his ministry. He wasn't just a preacher to us, he was a beacon of hope, a man who carried the very words of God. When I was young, I remember the way he looked at me, the way he spoke to my parents. He didn't just speak to us, he spoke to our hearts. He convinced us that God's voice was alive in him, that his ministry was the only true path to salvation. And over the years, I didn't question it. How could I? I did what I thought was right, I believed in him. He was more than a man, he was an anchor, a guide. And so, when he told me that my life's purpose was to serve him, to help him in his mission, I thought nothing of it. How could I question the call of God? It wasn't just about faith anymore, it was my duty. My destiny. But the real shift came when the prophet began speaking to me more directly. It wasn't just about helping with small tasks at the church or community events. No, it became clear that I was meant for something greater. And so, I found myself standing before him one day, being told to leave my family, my home, my education, all to follow him. You see, at first, I couldn't understand it. I was just a teenager, still full of dreams, still holding on to the hope that one day I might finish my schooling and make something of myself. But he was persuasive. He made me believe that my worldly desires, my schooling, my future, were distractions, unnecessary things that could only pull me away from God's true path for my life. He promised me that, through Him, I would find purpose. That everything I did in service to Him was service to God. He convinced not just me, but all of us, me and my friends, those who were like family to me, that this was the only way. The way of obedience, of selfless devotion. And the more we followed, the more our lives seemed to intertwine with His mission. I remember the day the prophet convinced us to leave our homes and move into the church compound. He said it was for the greater good. That the work we were doing was too important to be done from a distance. He told us that the world needs us, and that we must dedicate ourselves fully, or risk losing what God has planned for us. At first, it felt strange. But the feeling of purpose was overwhelming. We were young, full of hope, and eager to serve. The prophet assured us that by staying at the church, we would be living in God's will, that this was a sacrifice to ensure our place in God's kingdom. My brother, it didn't seem like a sacrifice at all. It felt like an honor. A privilege. And so, we packed our things, said goodbye to our families, and moved into the compound, where the walls seemed to echo with prayer, with worship. We lived and breathed the ministry, day in and day out. No distractions, no temptations. Just the work of God, and the prophet at the helm. I thought I was doing the right thing. At the time, I couldn't see how my obedience was slowly becoming my prison. We weren't just working for the prophet, we were becoming extensions of him, constantly told that our purpose was to serve his ministry, to serve him. He wasn't just our spiritual guide, he became the center of our world. He told us what to think, how to act, what was acceptable, and what wasn't. It didn't matter if we had doubts, they were dismissed as a lack of faith. To question him was to question God's will. And in time, I stopped questioning. I dedicated myself completely to the ministry, just as he wanted. Days blurred together, cleaning, cooking, helping with services, and providing support to his ever-growing following. My friends, my fellow servants, were caught in the same web, their lives woven around his mission. We were his disciples, and we believed in the work we were doing. I will say that, we spent years there until to me, I felt something started to change. I began to notice the things that once felt like divine work now seemed like manipulation. The small comforts he enjoyed for himself grew. He asked for more than we could give, and the demands on our lives became suffocating. It wasn't enough to serve once in a while or to contribute here and there. No, everything became about complete devotion, about obedience without question. And the more I gave, the more I realized that there was never enough. He was never satisfied. The work kept increasing, and yet I began to wonder if it was truly for God, or if it was only ever about keeping us loyal, keeping us dependent on him. But by then, I had already sacrificed so much. I had nothing left but my faith in him, my belief that everything I did was for a purpose greater than myself. And the truth is that, looking back, I wonder how I allowed myself to be so completely consumed by the idea that he was God's chosen servant. He never asked for anything directly. No, he worked in the subtleties, through suggestions and gentle guidance, convincing us all that this life, our life, was the only one that mattered. At some point, I realized that the life I had chosen was no longer mine. That's when the dream started, the first sign that something was terribly wrong. But that is a story for another time. For now, I have to remember, it was the prophet's words that led me down this path. His promises of divine calling, his promises of fulfillment through service, and the gentle insistence that I could never leave because my purpose was bound to his. All of it, now, feels like a distant echo. But at the time, it was the truth I lived by. Okay. Let me start that one this way. You see, like I was saying, for years, I lived in the echo of the prophet's words, in the rhythm of service, the endless tasks that kept me busy, the constant hum of devotion that filled my every waking moment. But then came the dreams. Before all of that, though, there was the silence, the isolation. Living in the church house, we were cut off from everything. That, I have come to understand that, it was done in such a way that, we will not be exposed to his tricks and never hear of any other truth apart from his own. You see, the prophet made it clear that we were to live in complete devotion, with no distractions. And so, he built walls around us, walls of doctrine, walls of control. We were told, no, commanded, that we could not watch any other pastor, could not listen to any other teachings, could not watch television or read anything that wasn't specifically sanctioned by him or the ministry. My brother, it wasn't just a rule, it was a way of life. There was only one channel we were allowed to watch, and that channel was the churches. The only teaching materials we could access were those that came from the prophet himself. There was no room for independent thought, no opportunity for us to hear or learn from anyone other than the prophet. The idea was simple: everything we needed to know, everything we needed to believe, was right there in the words and teachings of the prophet. Everything outside that was a distraction, a potential contamination of our purity, our devotion. We were not allowed to read books that weren't approved. No other pastors, no other ministries. It was as if the world outside the church no longer existed. The walls that surrounded us weren't just physical, they were ideological. We were immersed in the prophet's version of the truth, and to stray from that path would be to lose our way. I remember feeling so disconnected from the world around me. My friends and family would call, but I couldn't visit them. We were all encouraged to stay focused on our service. And so, we did. But there were days when I longed for something more, a different perspective, even just a conversation with someone who wasn't involved in the ministry. But that wasn't allowed. The prophet made sure of that. At the time, I believed it was for our own good. He said that the distractions of the world were a tool of the devil, meant to pull us away from our true purpose. The outside world, with all its varying voices and opinions, was dangerous. Only the teachings of the prophet could guide us through the storm of life. And so, we stayed in our bubble, isolated in that house. Our lives became one big sermon, one constant cycle of worship and service. The only voices we heard were those of the prophet and those who believed as he did. No one questioned it. At least, not out loud. To question was to doubt, and doubt was the greatest sin of all. But then, something started with me, and that was the dreams I started having. At first, they were small, fleeting visions, nothing that could shake the solid foundation of faith I had built around me. But gradually, they grew, becoming more vivid, more disturbing. In my sleep, I would find myself standing at the edge of a darkened room. I could hear the low murmur of voices, strange and unfamiliar. I couldn't see clearly at first, but I could feel something was wrong. There was a coldness in the air, something sinister, lurking just beyond the edges of my awareness. I would try to move, to step closer, but my feet felt rooted to the ground, as if something was holding me back. And then, I would see him, I would see the prophet standing in the center of the room, not alone, but surrounded by shadows. These shadows weren't just people, they were figures whose forms seemed to ride and shift, like they weren't quite human. They wore dark robes, their faces obscured by hoods, their presence oppressive. They whispered in languages I couldn't understand, their voices like wind rustling through dead leaves. And the prophet. He stood among them, his face calm, serene even, as though he were one of them. The first time I had this dream, I woke up with my heart pounding in my chest, my breath shallow. But then, I convinced myself it was just a nightmare, nothing more. But when it happened again, and again, I couldn't ignore it. The images were too clear, too real. There was no denying it anymore. You see, in each dream, the ritual seemed to become more detailed, more real. The prophet stood in the middle, performing some kind of incantation with those figures. It wasn't prayer. No, this was different. The air will feel heavy with a dark energy, one I could never have imagined in the place of worship we called our church. The shadows seemed to pull at him, like they were feeding on his energy, and he on theirs. I saw strange symbols etched into the floor, symbols I recognized but couldn't quite place. They were ancient. And with each passing night, the rituals grew more intense. The prophet's calm demeanor remained unchanged, even as the air around him thickened with something I could only describe as evil. I couldn't understand what I was seeing. This man, who had been my guide, the one I had trusted with my life, seemed to be part of something I could never have imagined. And in those moments, I felt a coldness in my heart, a growing sense of dread that I had been walking in the wrong direction all these years. You see, I tried to push the dreams away. I told myself they were nothing but my mind's way of processing my exhaustion, my doubt. But the more I tried to suppress them, the stronger they became. The dreams started to invade my waking hours. I would be walking in the church, serving the community, and out of nowhere, I would catch a glimpse of the prophet's face, and for just a second, the image would flicker. I would see him surrounded by shadows, speaking to those same figures, performing those same rituals. The line between dream and reality blurred, and I couldn't trust my own mind anymore. What happened was that I began to distance myself, though I never fully acknowledged it. I couldn't bring myself to confront the truth. I loved him, or at least, I thought I did. He had been the guiding force in my life for so long. To question him, to face what my mind was telling me, would mean losing everything I had ever known. My whole life, all the years of sacrifice, would be a lie. But the dreams kept coming, growing more frequent, more intense. One night, the shadows were closer than ever before. This time, the prophet was holding something in his hands, a book, old and worn, its pages yellow with age. I didn't need to see the symbols to know it wasn't a Bible.
What do we truly seek when we say we want to serve or know God? Our dear sister thought she was serving God by serving this prophet. Unknown to her, she was just putting her whole life away at the service of another man. Remember, every step you take towards serving God can be a step away from yourself. Choose wisely, for the path to the unknown is often paved with the cost of your soul. Now, take a moment to reflect on what you've just witnessed. If you found truth in our confessions, don't just walk away. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and leave a comment below. Until next time when we come your way with the continuation, remember, your soul, your peace, and your integrity are worth more than anything this world can offer. Stay true to yourself, and you'll never lose your way.